Thanks for coming, everyone. This is the Third Ear Thursday that we do once a month on the third Thursday at 3 p.m. I try to keep those threes in there to make it easy for people to remember when to show up. What we're going to get into today is business foundations, and I've got two lovely guests with me that you may have seen in the invitation. I've got Mark Iorio here and I've got Tevis Trower. So Mark and Tevis, if you want to say hi and tell us a little bit about yourselves, feel free.
Tevis, you go first.
I am a 25-year entrepreneur and I grew up in business strategy and joint ventures. About 25 years ago, I left corporate America to start my own company. And through grace and a lot of hard work, a lot of grit, I'm still in business. It's evolved a lot over the years. And it continues to be a fascination. It's a kaleidoscope. I'd like to think of running a business as a kaleidoscope. You have to keep watching the factors and the parameters shift, and you have to keep looking at the big picture and asking yourself, what does this mean to my mission? So I'm thrilled to be on this conversation with Mark and Nancy, and of course, with your questions. Those are the drivers.
Nancy, thank you for inviting me and Tevis to this. I am the managing partner at BCAT Partners. BCAT stands for the Brand and Culture Alignment Technology. I started my other company, Mega Group, in 1987, and I've been a television host of more than two programs. Rainmakers Roundup, which aired for 7.5 years on RVN television, and now Language of Leadership, which is on NetStream. I interview C-level executives to talk about language and how they implement those behaviors in their organization to make it more aligned with their mission, their purpose. BCAT developed a psychological tool that helps organizations align their culture and their brand. We have a 4-step process with that. It was based on the work that Carl Jung did back in the 1930s, personality archetypes. He had a 12-factor model. My partner and I distilled it into a 4-factor model. It doesn't eliminate, but it helps break down those passive aggressive behaviors and some of the conflicts that you see in organizations, and makes people a little bit more collaborative and cooperative with the work that they do, and increases productivity and that sort of stuff. So very happy to be here, and we'll talk more about how we can continue to bridge that brand and culture gap later on.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just going to do a quick plug that I will be on your show, Mark. I believe it's the end of May. I'll send some information as that date nears. I thought it was a good lead in to talk about why we set up a business entity in the first place, to go back and start thinking about those foundations. Most people will create, for example, an LLC or a corporation, a separate entity from themselves, as a way of holding liability for taxes and then for injuries to either people or property. And that's a great risk management tool, but as you're going to hear during this particular webinar, that is not enough. What you'll find from your insurance carrier alone is that they want to see more. You can do more by getting that insurance and putting those policies in place that reduce your risk even further. As you'll hear in a future webinar from one of my colleagues who's in insurance, that we're seeing more and more that insurance companies want to know what you're doing to align to reduce your risk. Because if you understand how insurance works, you're pooling the resources, right, to pay for claims. And insurance companies don't like to pay for claims. So what do they want to see from you? They want to see you not get sued. They want to see you not have claims. And again, how do you do that? It's by aligning. I like to think of this as your retaining wall, kind of like you build the structure, and then the retaining wall is your vision, your mission, and your core values. Because I've got Mark and Tevis here, I think it would be wonderful to hear from you all about vision, mission, core values, how you see this play out. I'd like to hear from you.
Believe it or not, the first question that we ask as the survey is being distributed to the organization is, it's called an incorporating question. And the incorporating question that we ask is, imagine or visualize your entire team as though it were a single person doing its best work on its best day to deliver all of its promises and achieve all of its goals. What does that look like? It doesn't really matter what you do for a living. The four factors that we look for, and they're adjectives in our survey instrument, basically key off or fire your frontal cortex in your brain. The four factors are teams that are more oriented around innovation or expressiveness or outside the box thinking, or teams that are more dominant or direct, teams that are more oriented around expertise, or lastly, teams that are more fair-minded or harmonious. Like a DISC model or Myers-Briggs or Hogan or any of those personality assessments that you take, organizations are a chemical makeup of the purpose of the organization. So that brand positioning statement is the value of the organization. We take where everyone landed, we average it out, and then we express the behaviors that would take place if you stayed in that one spot on the quadrant. We then do a series of workshops where if the organization wants to move it to another spot on the quadrant, we then express those behaviors. And once we've done that, we create what we call a series of aligned inspirations, or your commandments for the organization. This is how we behave as a team. And it touches everything. Every single person in the organization is impacted by this. Then the last step is that everyone gets a document. They make 4 promises. Number 1, what 1 or 2 things can I do each day to help migrate the culture of my team toward its North Star? It's not just talking about the vision, mission, and core values. It's actually doing something about it. Who's my accountability partner? Who's going to help me and support me in this mission? Which of those aligned inspirations do I impact? And then lastly, which of those little knobs in my head do I have to change to become or to deliver on that promise? The whole idea of core values is actually doing something about it, making sure that your behavior is in alignment with the promise that you make.
And Tevis, I want to hear from you because I think of it differently, where I feel like a lot of times what we discover is that we declare certain core values. We think we know what they are, but it takes a while to understand that. I tell employees to think about it that way too. Not just what are the core values that are on the website or in the advertising or in the materials, but what kind of values do you think a company has based on what you're observing from them? Maybe we need to look at it from both directions. Tevis, what do you think about that?
Well, I love the pulling out the stretchy material between what we say and what we do. And I really appreciate Mark's process. The phrase that jumped out at me is the knobs in the head, right? Because I think that one of the great opportunities and the great challenges, failures of culture work is that we're not looking at the knobs in the head. Many of our conditioned responses to challenges are so deeply embedded that they are unconscious. To give you a little bit about the company I built, I got into this pretty innocently. I thought if people know how to take care of themselves, they'll be less stressed and they will function better. So I started out as a transformational / well-being company. We were executing huge programs across companies like Google and Yahoo and Bloomberg and Viacom and Chanel. One of the things I found is that I was creating a pressure valve for bad behavior at the top. It wasn't intentionally bad behavior. It was unconscious, ineffective, counterproductive behavior. Wrapping my head around that, I sort of asked myself, what is the driver for people who get into either high performer, C-suite proximate kinds of roles? Oftentimes, it so closely ties in to their identity and sense of self-worth that their mechanisms for survival are so automatic that they are unconscious. The work I've been doing really over the past 8 years has been, how do we bring into consciousness that which is an automatic knee-jerk reaction that may actually be sabotaging all the good work of folks like Mark? How do we really sit with our senior leaders and influencers and the folks who are being primed to have the keys to the kingdom? How do we create such a safe space that they are able to look at what their pre-conscious assumptions are about being successful, being respected, moving forward, all those things? Like, how do they actually navigate their day-to-day, midterm, and long-term threats to that identity? That's where my passion point lies, because that's really about self-cultivation, sovereignty, and discovery. And I really am passionate that when we have more of that present amongst our leaders, the entire organization benefits.
Thank you both. I think what it comes down to is that we all approach this with our own little nuance, and yet there's no one process that's the perfect one. I've done both the very clinical kind of assessment and looked at my own leadership, and of course have talked to my clients about the different things that they've done. Hearing the two of you, what I hear is that we all know that there's just a lot that needs to be done as you grow your business, as you're working in larger organizations. The more people that come together, naturally the more conflicts you're going to see. I want to give people an opportunity to walk away from this webinar today with some actionable steps. Like, what are the kinds of things that they can start doing today, no matter what position they're in, maybe right after this webinar today?
This is really a moment of flux and change globally, not just in our country. And I think that the sense of overwhelm in having an ideal world is incumbent. It's like built in to the question. What our first question actually has to be is not about the world outside of us, but the world within us. How do we want to show up? What energy do we want to bring? What impact? What do we want to stand for? The default assumption in Western culture is look at the world around you, the extrinsic reality as we perceive it, and make your mark against that extrinsic perception that you have. But what we don't put a lot of focus on is what is intrinsic. You can't even start with an ideal world until you start to ask those questions of yourself. And because high performers have been grooming themselves to win according to extrinsic goals their entire lives, this is oftentimes a blind spot. The first question, I feel like, for a leader to be true and grounded and clear and centered is about that. What do I stand for? What is it I am cultivating in myself that by being loyal to it will carry through no matter what is happening around me? And by creating a vivid picture of what that is, the first oppressors we have to face are the ones within ourselves.
Yeah.
That's where the rubber hits the road, because no matter what, it's going to come up again and again and again in any venue. It could be a political conversation, it could be a board meeting, it could be this or that, until we square up with that inner dialogue happening inside of us.
Everywhere you go, there you are.
That's a great quote coming out of the 12-step program. It's funny, I had an amazing interview yesterday with an author of a book on the power of self-leadership. And one of the things that Doug said yesterday on the interview was finding those values in each of us in order to fully participate in a larger team. I couldn't agree with you, Tevis, or Doug yesterday more. There's three questions that we always ask. Who am I? You can answer that question by writing your own personal constitution, by going through your own core values, by doing your own self-assessments like DISC or Myers-Briggs or whatever. The second question we ask is, who are you? Now that I understand who I am, who are you? The question we never ask is, who are we? And that's what we're doing with BCAT. Who are we as a team? But in order to get there, we have to understand first, who am I? Who are you? And that's how you affect change in your own little world, by understanding you and the person you're with and the team you work with.
We don't always think of ourselves as part of a bigger group, a bigger world. We have to develop the skill to look outside of ourselves. We have to be aware that we live in a world and that we're part of something else. I personally have a big world vision, right? Those of you that know me know that I'm still out to try and bring people into these kinds of conversations to make a difference. But I can also see where I personally have not always acted in alignment with what I thought my values were. And I think that's an important part of the conversation too, recognizing that you're going to screw it up. Working as a lawyer and a mediator, I see people when they have screwed it up and they just need to repair it. That's the other part that I think is sometimes missing, is that we maybe make a mistake and we get so worried about how that's going to affect us that we're not even thinking about the impact on the other person. Part of what I do when I'm doing a mediation is rehumanize the other person so that we can really focus on the problem, but without ignoring the fact that there's a lot of emotion and a lot of other response going on. I think that's the conversation we're trying to get into. And these are some of the tools that we can use. But one of the reasons that the last quote action in my DIY conflict resolution process is to stay on par. It's plan, act, revise, repeat, because you're never going to get the perfect result. When you do, it's going to change and you're going to be back trying to maintain that. Part of this is also just recognizing it's a process. It's not like you declare your vision, put it on the wall, put it on your website, and then it's like, yay, we're done.
I go to Martin Buber, I thou here now, which is one of my fallbacks. And you can't push the river. You can't drive an agenda without understanding what's flowing. One of the ways of knowing and responding that I think is undervalued in a lot of leadership and cultural thinking is precognitive. It's not our mental sense, because that's just neurological patterns playing out over and over again, but really teaching our leaders and training ourselves to listen to what the felt sense is. And the reason I bring that up is that the brain is going to train you for safety. The brain is going to train you to respond to threat.
Or what it thinks is safety.
Perception is reality, as we know. But when we can train ourselves to actually listen to our felt sense, our felt discomfort, where does that happen? What triggered that? And how might that cause me to sacrifice skillfulness in this I, thou, here, now if I don't pay attention? That's just the beginning. It's really in the moment that we say, I'm starting to see my safety zone. I'm starting to see my defaults, my racket, my game. But can I go deeper? What are the inroads to deeper understanding of why I do what I do and how I can attend to it more skillfully so that when those reactions are kicked in place, I can catch them?
I think that's what BCAT does, right, Mark? I know you mentioned that there are other assessments, but I think the purpose of any assessment is really to get at what Tevis is talking about. Getting behind those drivers. I know for the longest time, I was attracting clients who would say, this is just who I am, deal with it. They started to learn that, yes, that's who you are, but who you are and how you behave are also different things. When you understand why you behave a certain way, you can embrace who you are and then use the behaviors to illuminate the better parts of who you are. That's the way I like to see it. And I'm curious if that's what you find after doing probably numerous assessments.
Yeah, we've worked with over 250 companies now over the last decade. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was these rubber bracelets that had WWJD on it. What
Yeah.
would Jesus do? It's not Jesus, but what is the purpose of your mission as a person and as a business owner, as an employee? What would you do in this situation? And what you need is a governor in your head that says, I want to do the right thing. I want to uphold and adhere to and align to the mission of this organization, or at least my own personal constitution. That is a very difficult process to go through. If anyone has done it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Figuring out exactly who you are, not the roles that we have in life. I'm talking about your identity in your higher power, God's eyes. When you write that constitution, it makes it a little bit easier, not perfect, but a little bit easier to stay in alignment with the decisions that you make each day. I don't care whether you're a business owner, an employee, whatever you are. That's what we try to impart with BCAT. What is your purpose when you're doing your best work on your best day? Visualize that and try to behave like that each day. It takes a lot of hard work. It's behavioral change, but it's worth the effort.
What we find is that our clients end up being more successful down the line. I've definitely seen with my clients that have originally come to me with litigation. They needed me to defend them or some sort of employee conflict. The more they started to do this self-discovery, the more they started to recognize where they were out of alignment. Some of them moved on to different employers because they recognized they weren't in a compatible relationship. Just like any other type of relationship, you need to align your values and you need to have a similar mission. Otherwise, it's just not going to work no matter how much they pay you. And then I've seen some of my clients who had just calculated into the cost of doing business a certain degree of litigation because of the industry they were in, the turnover that was expected. They started to do some of this inner work that you're talking about. The more they started to dig in to how they were showing up and how they were influencing the culture, it shifted. Their employee turnover went down, their revenue went up. It's an ongoing process, especially today, as Tevis, you alluded to. We're seeing some drastic changes, and we're going to continue to see them with new technology coming in, with changes in the way that we do business globally. That's going to continue to happen. I think having the conversations that we're having today are critical for what I call a sustainable workplace. Was there anything you want to talk about with mission, either of you? Or do you see those kind of the same?
We don't break vision, mission, and values down into those three areas. As I said earlier, it's called a brand positioning statement. And not to get too technical here, but no matter where you land on that quadrant, there are specific words, adjectives in each of those four quadrants that elicit an emotional and an intellectual load on your brain, your body. When you see those specific words, those, whether it's a mission or as we call it, the brand positioning statement, if there's 100 words in that brand positioning statement, they need to be loaded in that chemical makeup of where you landed on that quadrant. That is the behavior of the organization. We eliminate vision, mission, and core values because what we do is we turn this brand positioning statement into action. It has to be actionable. You can't just say, like you said, Nancy, I'm going to hang my mission statement on the wall, and in 5.5 years, I'm going to look at it, and it's going to be a whole bunch of dust on it, and no one's done anything about it. What we want to do is connect the head, the intellect, the heart, the emotion, and the hands.
I love that. Hands, heads, and heart.
I love that too.
It's beautiful. I'm thinking about how to answer this in such a way that's really of optimal impact for business owners. How can a business owner think about this in such a way that they really bring themselves into alignment? One of the great experiences I had was studying with the marketing chair professor at Stanford. His name was Michael Ray. He created a really beautiful model that I've loved. It's this question of what is myself and what is my work. I love it that Mark is talking about, say you come up with 100 adjectives that are evocative and you're trying to distill them down into what, through a core values kind of exercise, would somehow speak to all of them. Someone might choose freedom, another person might choose flexibility or embracing risk. The subtleties, the NLP involved in what words you boil that down to are going to be really specific for each person, especially if you boil it down to a handful of words. When we ask ourselves, what is myself? I'm talking capital S. I'm talking beyond body, beyond what you were born into or where you live. What is your core essence of who you are? Then what is your work in this lifetime? Not your job, but what is your work on this planet? What do you stand for? And capital W, work. What is your work in this lifetime? Once you get really clear on that, then ask yourself, what is my small s? My small s is this company that is going to honor my capital S self by doing this small w work. By saying lowercase, it doesn't mean it's less important or impactful because it is how you bring into being the high self and the big work of your lifetime. When you have a leader or leaders, a C-suite, who have all asked themselves those questions and then gone to the other question, the thou here now that Mark talked about, then you've really got alignment. The invitation in that moment is to make sure that you are giving your employees, everyone that you hire, that same invitation into self-inquiry.
I love that you brought that forward into the conversation of invitation. That is something that I definitely stress, is that we always want to be inviting. That's what inclusion is about. It's about inviting people to participate in the opportunity, to work in our workplace, and then not just inviting them to participate, but giving them the tools that they need to succeed. And it's invitation to participate in business. I talk to my clients about that. One of the things that they forget on the compliance end is that you don't have a right per se to do business. It's an invitation to do business in exchange for an agreement to comply with the laws. It's really interesting when clients have that conversation with me. Can I just run my business however I want? You can, but not without consequences. I think we're getting to that a little bit too. If we're not taking the time to understand what motivates us, what causes the behaviors that we constantly exhibit, the more you observe someone and their consistent conduct, that will tell you what they really value no matter what they say.
Mhm.
And I tell employees to watch for somebody that's not acting consistent with what they say their values are. That's the employment setting that you're going to go into, which is the other side of this conversation. Your employees are watching and your prospective employees are watching. You're going to miss opportunities to have some of the top talent come work for you.
It's not only the top talent, but it's actually harnessing their optimal contribution. You could have the top talent and they could be on board, but if you're not doing what we're talking about, you're never going to get the best out of them.
We may be using slightly different language, but all in all, it's the same process. It is understanding who we are, understanding who you are, understanding who we are, actually doing the work, walking the talk. We actually had a show called Walking the Talk. People do business with you for the same reason they want to buy from you. When you think of great brands, influential brands, whether it's Ritz-Carlton or Tiffany or Southwest Airlines, there are reasons that you are attracted to those brands because they are consistent in the delivery of the promise that they make each day. And that doesn't come by accident. That takes work. You look at sports teams that are constantly winning. It's because it takes work each day. It doesn't just happen on the last day of the season. One last thing I'll share. This author brought this up yesterday. I said to Doug, you've got 12 mentors and role models in your book. It's like 12 chapters, 12 steps. How did you find them? He said, I'm 71 years old. I've been through this for many years. I oftentimes pick the wrong role model in my life or the wrong mentor because I didn't go through the diligence of understanding who I was first and whether or not my values and my character aligned. Almost every person I interviewed over the 7.5 years that I interviewed people on Rainmakers Roundup, the one thing that they said that was common was to have a good mentor or a good role model in their lives.
That goes right back to the conversation of this brand statement, as you call it, or if we want to call it mission, vision, values. It's finding somebody that we would actually want to be like. Not just, oh, we would like to have their money or their title or whatever the trappings of their position are, is recognizing who would I really like to become?
Yep.
And is that a person that can guide me in that way, but also recognizing that you're never going to be a different person. What I think a great mentor does is helps you be more of who you are and not all the extra that accumulate along the way.
I think that we're all on a similar page. Mark spoke of this author who acknowledged sometimes picking the wrong mentor. And you mentioned the propensity that we have to focus on our successes. One of the things that I have made a periodic practice that I think really shed a lot of light on what my part has been in my choices, be it choosing the wrong mentor, taking a job that's not a fit, or going for a client relationship that's not aligned, is I've actually done a resume, not just all my amazing accomplishments and the clients I got and the money we made and reflecting on the great team moments, et cetera, but really looking at what that journey has been and what I can extract in learning about who I really am and what my blind spots are, how I may have been snowing myself as a leader. There is so much power in looking across your life and asking yourself, what are my standout moments of, oh, how did I not see this coming? One of the major benefits I have gotten from it is by looking back and saying, I actually did see this coming and I ignored it. So we're refining that connection to the inner voice of wisdom, the humbling.
Wow, that was really amazing. It reminded me of you don't know how much weight you need to lose until you step on the scale. Nobody really likes to do that. But you're right. You start to realize that you overcame so much, you are so much. And what you're looking at as a failure, you turned into something more beautiful. Wow, what a powerful exercise to just take a look. The other thing I got from that was the humility part. We do not live in a world that teaches us to be humble. If anything, we're told to be everything but that. And it's the humility that I think often draws people to us, especially as leaders, recognizing that we all have the ability to be a leader. I'm nothing special. I'm just taking action, as Mark would say. I'm just working with what I have. What a great webinar. I hope you all have enjoyed it as much as we have. What questions do you all have? What comments do you want to share? Did you get something really powerful out of this? Feel free to jump in here.
Felt like a philosophy hour, but in the best way possible, for lack of a better way to put it. I definitely agree with a lot of your points on culture and what leadership really is. That's becoming, I think, much more and more of a topic in thought leadership itself, what leadership really means, especially in the business sense. It's not hierarchical or vertical as we typically think of it. I think it's great that a lot of cultural norms are starting to be challenged around that and that you guys are helping push that.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. And I'm in a philosophy class right now. And I have to say, some of the topics came up in different forms. This has been a nice refresher because it's what you're seeing even in this webinar. We come at it from different angles, but we're all ultimately striving to get to the same place. Sarita, you had your hand up. What do you want to share?
Wow, this conversation is so timely, not only because it's 2025 and we live in the world that we live in, but I know that for me, one of my core values is communication. I am a former finance professional who has moved into the nutrition and cancer space. And this took years. And I was in finance for 25 years. One of the reasons I left corporate and finance is because I wasn't feeling that the C-suite was aligned with my core values. Now I have the opportunity as a small business owner to maybe partner up with another company who's interested in my product or my services. And just last night, I said to myself, I'm not really digging their communication style. There's no transparency. And so this conversation tells me that what I'm feeling, my gut feeling, I'm on the right track. That I don't want to look at this 6 months later and say, the writing was on the wall. I may have to say no. Thanks, but no thanks. And then just do this on my own. Yeah. God, source put this in front of me. Thank you all.
You're welcome. Hopefully what you also got is that there are many tools you can use to kind of flesh that out. And then you can engage so that you have no regrets. You follow through with the communication, you share where you're going, and you learn a lot in the process of engaging. Your gut might be telling you something, and that's wonderful to pay attention to it, but also check it. Trust but verify. We're all just doing, again, the best that we can with what we have. No matter how this plays out, you'll get through it. Thank you to everyone. This was really amazing. But before we go, I just want to make sure you all know how to reach Tevis and Mark. If something resonated with you, here's how to find them, find out more about their businesses.
Nancy, thank you. That was terrific. And Nick and Sarita, thanks for being here. And Tevis, it was a pleasure being with you.
It was so great having this conversation. It's so funny how the gift of being invited into this conversation brings alive what each of us care about the most, whether we're the ones speaking or the ones listening. And I feel like that's the biggest gift that Nancy is giving all of us by making this happen.